the box. Big chance coming, perhaps. Evandro! Fantastic football from Hull City. And now we are in a dream scenario at Villa Park. It's 2-0 before half-time.
Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers, our flashback episode. I'm joined today by Mike. How are you, Mike?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Sorry, I was just distracted. I was just trying to get all my recordings set up. We're here to talk about much, arguably happier times than the current season we're going through. But we were talking just before the episode went to air, and I talked to Logan in the first half of this season flashback. It is actually quite an appropriate season to review and reflect on, given our current woes in terms of basically not being able to buy a win. But we'll look back on the second half of the season. We've touched on the first half. We'll look back on the second half of the season now. And we were talking just before we went to air that we'd actually both forgotten that this was a season that we both attended games in person. So a very appropriate season to get you on for. So maybe we start with memories of that. So you went to the Stoke game, I believe. Was that the only one you went to?
Yeah, I was over there for a year studying, but it was the one game that I could make time to go out and see. And the club were nice enough to help me meet Jackson Irvine after the game. But yeah, that was I think a 2-0 win against Stoke. I was in the North Stand. A great atmosphere and a nice Bowen free kick to get everyone excited as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And for myself, it was unfortunately not as fond a memory. It was, well, depends who you ask if it was a fond memory. It was, we were actually on my honeymoon. We'd been over in Italy and other parts of Europe and were staying in London for a bit and couldn't pass up the opportunity to get up to Hull for a game whilst we were over there. So we did see the Sheffield United game towards the end of April, where I think mathematically we were still a chance at the playoffs. And I met Irvine before the game as well. And, players are going to talk the talk and suggest that there's still a chance of anything happening. I think we were 10th in the table at that point. So I guess mathematically still a chance. In goal that day, George Long made his debut for us, obviously ex-Sheffield United as well. Adkins having been a previous Sheffield United manager as well. And we proceeded to lose 3-0. Really, that game, because I'd been to games back in the Premier League season under Bruce with a full KCOM as it was back then, absolutely bouncing. And to be there for that Sheffield United game in front of, call it 7,000 or 8,000 fans and, being able to wander into the ground and essentially pick a seat to sit in behind the goal was quite depressing. The one silver lining to that game being that afterwards in the pub watching, I want to say it was Leeds versus Brentford, where Brentford beat Leeds. And because of that, Sheffield United went up and Leeds weren't able to go up automatically at least. And the Leeds supporters just absolutely frothing at the mouth at the idea that Adkins had deliberately thrown the game by debuting Long in goal was quite a funny one. Even though we lost that game, I want to say McGoldrick scored a couple of goals. I'm just having a look. Yeah, so McGoldrick scored a couple and the Stevens as well. So obviously that was just before Sheffield United went up and finished 9th in the Premier League as well. So that was a pretty good run for them. But yeah, look, it's an interesting half of the season to look back on because of how well it started and how much promise there was in the side at that point in time. Talking with Logan last time, a 4-game winning run heading into January. Started January with a further 2 wins, 6-0 over Bolton and a 3-0 over Sheff Wednesday as well. So really in the thick of things. And then we had the audio at the start of this of heading to Aston Villa, being in with a chance of going into the playoff places with a win there, going up 2-0, and then unfortunately choking's maybe the wrong word, but being pulled back to 2-2. We were talking before the episode started, actually, just in terms of investment in January, what that could have meant for the squad. And you had a really good point about, this being a really good opportunity to even just strengthen the squad and prevent what would happen the following season.
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned to you before, if we look at the last 10 years, there are probably key moments we can pick out as potentially explaining why we ended up in League One and why we're in the position that we're in now. I mean, I think the position we're in now is very different to back then. But I think, we have this good form. Everyone's excited around the club. I think everyone around the city is excited. At least that's what I felt when I was there. And then to almost make no investment in January and then assume that the squad that we've got is good enough to hold the spot, knowing that we were going to lose Bowen. I think we were all kind of hopeful. But, you know, it was just too good, right? 22 goals in one season. But yeah, I think we were all a bit surprised and shocked. And I think potentially that Villa game may have been the turning point of the season.
Oh, look, I still reference it to this day whenever because that season's still the closest that we've come to the championship play. Well, other than last season, obviously, the closest we've come to the championship playoffs in a fair while.
Yeah.
And that Villa game for me is still always the symbol of, you know, there is that game in the season where if you win it, you're in with a real chance of the playoffs. And if you don't win it, you feel like, you know, that the chance is kind of slip through your hands. And that Villa game exemplified that, like you said.
Last season, that was the first game of the season, right? That was the Norwich game.
Look, in hindsight, like absolutely. I think last season, I'm trying to think. I'm sure that the West Brom game. The West Brom game's the perfect comparison last season.
That's timely.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. I didn't think that wasn't deliberate, but that West Brom game at home last season, right? Like we go 1-0 up. It's almost exactly like the Villa game. You go 1-0 up. You're all over them. You've got the chance to really, you know, secure the win and lock yourself in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And we concede and we draw that game and we sort of tailed off after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Villa was very much a similar situation in that season.
Yeah. Well, we can jump to the next slide here now. So we've got the players that we did actually sign in January, which, you know, I still have that memory of that season, even heading into deadline day, because we always love a deadline day signing. Ehab, you know, for once was sort of saying, yeah, I'll back the manager. I'll invest some funds. We'll support this push for the playoffs. Getting excited about, I think there were probably a few different rumors about things that we were looking to do. I can't remember player names off the top of my head now, but I'm sure we were linked to a few to get us excited. And of course it's, you know, Liam Ridgewell. No, I feel really bad. Like I'm sort of slating this guy, but like I
think he's not a bad player. I just don't think we made the recruitments that we needed to make that in that window. And I think that's probably the most politically correct way we can put it. What we needed and you know the depth that we needed, we just didn't get right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like Pugh, I think is a reasonable signing coming in from Bournemouth. I think he scored a couple of goals for us in the end, so he wasn't too bad. But when you've got Chris Martin and Fraser Campbell as your two strikers, I mean, Campbell had a reasonable season as well. But you just think if you're adding like an actual decent, I mean, it's the story every season, right? You just need a striker, or a creative midfielder. I mean, Evandro just constantly getting injured that season, scored that goal against Villa, but you know, hamstrings made of Swiss cheese, basically. Like, you know, if you had someone in his role who was a bit more fit and capable, which maybe that was the intention of getting Pugh, but like you say, it was the recruitment that we brought in wasn't what we needed that season.
Yeah, and I think it plagues us every season, but injuries, just I don't know what it is. It must be a Hull City curse. I think there was chats there were boys chatting in the group around our training field, potentially being a reason, because I don't think there's been much investment in that over the last couple of years. But yeah, I think the best way of summing it up is we needed to bring in, I guess, a clinical forward. I think we needed to look ahead and think about Bowen's replacement. And it just felt like, okay, you know, there are these two players available. We're going to go for them, and you know, we're going to assume no one gets injured and we'll be fine.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually, because we were talking before the episode just around Bowen, as you say, and I'd forgotten somewhat just how strong the belief was that really he was going to leave at the end of this season. Same with Grzycki. That I remember at the end of this, and I'll jump to the next slide now where we can sort of reflect more generally on the games. But I feel like I remember the end of that season, that final game of the season against, who was it? Who did we play? Bristol City, final day at home. Players doing a lap around the stadium and everyone being convinced that we weren't going to see Bowen and Grzycki in Hull City shirts again. And so in a way, it was remarkable that they were still there the following season. But we were talking before that in terms of investment in that January, you don't get much more risk-free than to say, for, I don't know, spend 3, 4, 5 million pounds, knowing that you've got Grzycki, Bowen, where if everything goes wrong, break glass in case of emergency, you can sell one or both of them in the summer as the alums to get your money back. Oh, look, obviously they could get injured and whatever, but we're talking sort of realistic scenarios. The players were there to recoup funds invested, even if the investments were duds, and we just didn't do it.
Yep. It's that simple. I mean, there's nothing else to add. It very much is that simple.
Yeah. In terms of the games, I mean, we've talked the Stoke game and the Sheffield United game, and obviously the Aston Villa game as well. I was just thinking, is there any other games that really stand out for you? I think that Brentford game where we lost 5-1. You know what? I think I'm thinking of the following. I feel like we got beaten up by Brentford a few times.
This season that we're talking about now, and I'm going to get called out for it, is probably one of the more forgettable seasons.
No, it's exactly what I was saying to Logan, that you've got the Slutsky season where you go, that stands in the memory because it was, first season post-relegation, you had Slutsky, you're scoring all these goals, it was chaotic, it was fun. You've got the McCann season where we get relegated to League One, you've got COVID, you've got Bowen and Grzycki leaving in January, all of that. But in terms of this season, it's so hard to sort of remember individual games because I feel like we didn't go up, we didn't go down, we sort of, after a really rocky start to the season, sort of leveled off mid-table. It's hard to have games stand in the mind. I'm just having a scan through now. I mean, there was I don't know, we beat Ipswich away. Grzycki got a double, beating Reading at home. But it's a shame because I was saying as well, the Hull City account on YouTube is usually really good with highlights of games. They have like compilations of all the highlights from the games of a particular season, but they don't for some reason for this season. So I couldn't even really refresh my mind for this one, which, I'm sure makes for great content when we're sort of saying I can't really remember too many games. But from a cup point of view, in the FA Cup, we went out in that first round, or the third round, I should say, against Millwall 2-1. So not even a memorable cup run, to be honest. So look, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we're sort of repeating ourselves here. I mean, the standout sort of memory from this half of the season is really the attempted promotion push, the disappointing spending in January, and Bowen, like you say, like 22 goals from Bowen in his second full senior season, scored that free kick in the game that you were at. If you want to see a season where a team is carried so much by one or two individuals in Bowen and Grzycki, this season sort of exemplifies it.
Yeah, I think the biggest talking point and something that definitely has shaped the next kind of what are we at 6 years is that Bowen season. I think had he not had a season like that, I think a lot of people wouldn't have. I mean, we all kind of knew he was going to be good, but I don't think we just knew how good he was going to be. And that season really, I think, kickstarted it for him. And kind of put him on the radar.
And his fate, like, I don't know how the alums did it. Like, for all their faults, they seem to fall into a lot of good luck with some of this stuff. Selling Bowen in the following January, we'll obviously get to in the following episodes, but selling him almost literally days, call it weeks before COVID hit, when fees dropped off dramatically, when clubs didn't know what the future would hold for TV deals and all of that, to get that amount of money for him in that January window to essentially keep the club afloat and to keep the club running on a day-to-day basis. As you say, like, if Bowen hadn't emerged as the player that he was, we didn't have anything really. Like, there was no valuable assets in that. I mean, we maybe would have sold Grzycki a bit earlier, but he's a lot older. I don't know if anyone would have forked out half the fee that we got for Bowen.
Yeah. I think it was definitely, I don't even want to call it a buffer season, because I think we have had seasons where we've been building and we've felt that. I think this was almost at least for the second half of the season, it just felt like a throwaway season. It is what it is. We're going to end up in the middle of the table, smack bang, if anything, which we did. And it was a conversation of, well, what does next season look like? Because I didn't feel like we were really building anything.
And actually, that's a really good point. Like, the last point to touch on before we wrap things up was Nigel Adkins himself as the manager. I guess the talking point towards the end of that season was the fact that he was coming out of contract, trying to offer him new terms to get him to stay on as the manager, and him walking away, which is pretty rare in management terms for a manager to essentially walk out on a club or to not renew their contract rather than being sacked by the club. So heading into that summer, looking for a new manager, not through, poor finish or anything. As you say, I mean, we weren't necessarily building anything, but at the same time, a stable mid-table finish, if we were to hold on to Bowen and Grzycki, potentially to push on the following, which ultimately, like under McCann, and we'll talk in the following episode about McCann, but under McCann, that first half of that season, like, let's not forget, we actually looked pretty good and we were in and around the playoffs for that first half of the season.
Yeah. It was a very weird one. I think potentially the lack of reinforcements in January may have been an annoying factor for Adkins. I can't remember if it was, I think he just chose to leave. I don't think it was necessarily a pushing out from the alarms.
Yeah. I think he had a job lined up.
No, I think it was, and I don't know if this kind of is a trend. I mean, we have reportedly been told that, Rosie fell out with Jun last year. Maybe Adkins fell out. Bruce fell out with them as well, with the alarm. So it could have just been another one of those situations.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at some of the names as well from the end of that season. So we tried to offer new contracts to Campbell and David Marshall. I have a feeling did Campbell stay the following season? I want to say that he did, but Marshall certainly left. And then guys like Will Keane, James Weir,
James Weir's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Yeah, they were all released at the end of this season. So bit of a changing of the guard in that sense. But Adkins leaving was certainly an interesting one, leaving in June of that season. Having finished 13th, nothing to be ashamed of. I was actually just going to try and have a quick look if he did actually end up anywhere the following season. No, he essentially took a year off and then he went to Charlton. So, dropping down a division as well. So, as you say, in terms of being frustrated potentially at a lack of funds in January, I mean, you have to be pretty frustrated to essentially take a year off work rather than, stay in the job. And maybe the terms that we were offering him were very reduced as well.
Yeah, and I think if I'm looking at it from his position, we're going. I don't remember what position we were in going into December or January, but I think we were all expecting an exciting end to the season. And I think Adkins probably would have said, "Hey, look, I need players to make that push," and maybe was told yes and then shown no, essentially. Yeah. And I think that's as a head coach, I think that's enough to kind of push you out of a club.
That's it. I think you're right. Like, I think any sort of false promises or anything like that from the club that might have sort of got his back up, and then he's sort of saying, well, if I'm going to sign a new deal, how do I even know that you're going to give me any funds in the summer? And I think probably the lack of funds was a main factor for him. But that's just about it for this half of the season. Look, we've got one season to go in our decade flashback, which is not a particularly pleasant season to finish on, given the way that we sort of fell out of the league. But we will wrap that season up. We've got the next international break in March. We'll start that season off and probably finish it off in our postseason, depending on how we go. But thank you for joining me for this one, Mike.
No, all good. Happy to relive a somewhat questionable season.
Yeah, mid-table season, not too miserable. So
no, compared to now, you're right. Yeah,
that's right. And thank you everyone for listening in. We'll be back next week to, unfortunately, return to the present and assess how things are going for City at the moment. But until then, come on, City.